Mr. Speaker, sir, before my speech proper, I would like to declare my interest that I work in the financial sector and I work in a bank that I'm proud to say do have a strong Singaporean core. So I would like to speak on our foreign manpower policy, essentially in two areas. Firstly, jobs that Singaporeans do not want, and secondly, jobs that Singaporeans want. Let me start with jobs that Singaporeans do not want. We have always depended on foreign migrant labour in our sectors like constructions, manufacturing and services in jobs that Singaporeans do not want to do, either due to work conditions, low remunerations or others. In particular, in the construction sectors, we have something like 341,000 foreign workers out of the workforce of 457,000, or 75% of the construction labour force. Similarly, in the cleaning and some manufacturing sectors, there are high numbers of foreign workers. The pleasant reality is that we have always enjoyed very low unemployment in Singapore, and that there are always other better jobs available for Singaporeans. And given the limited size of our local workforce, and that we are perpetually in tight labour market situations, especially in the low-wage sectors, companies in these industries will have to look to foreign labour to meet their workforce need. Our manpower policy facilitated that, but with a series of quotas and foreign workers' levies to keep demand within tolerable level, both physically and socially. We have lived with this system for many years, and it has helped grow our economy, enable us to press ahead with the massive infrastructure build-up, the MRT, the housings, the ports, the airports, the hospitals, the industrial facilities, and many others. But two major incidents or events have brought to focus our foreign workers policy, how we take care and manage the workers, as well as the numbers and our dependence on foreign labour in Singapore. Firstly, of course, is the Little India riot on 8th of December 2013. In the aftermath, a committee of inquiry, COI, was formed, and the COI report recommended a series of measures such as the provision of self-contained dormitories that comes with better amenities on sites, tighter regulatory frameworks, among the many measures. The second incident is, of course, the recent COVID-19 outbreak at the foreign workers' dormitories. The high transmissibility among the migrant workers at the dormitories led to massive response and the massive mobilization of resources within our system to prevent further spreads of the virus and to the rest of the almost 400,000 workers at the dormitories. Many of the workers needed to be decanted from their existing dormitories to provide segregation and to reduce density so as to minimize risk of further spreads. The entire response had taken a heavy toll on our system and, of course, exerted a high price. The steep infection rate at the dormitories once again brought to attention the living conditions of the foreign workers, as well as cause for Singapore to rethink its reliance and the high dependence on migrant manpower. Following the Little India riot COI report, there were deliberate efforts to site the purpose-built dormitories away from the residential estates so as to minimize any dissemination to the neighborhoods. In the process, it has also reduced visibilities of the foreign workers to the public. But the recent COVID-19 outbreak has once again brought the issue of migrant workers back into the limelight, and many Singaporeans were reminded, or some were surprised at the sheer numbers of the migrant labour in our workforce. We have in the past reviewed our foreign migrant manpower policy on a number of occasions. Besides during the Little India COI, the last major review on the foreign workers policy was in 2010 by the Economic Strategies Committee, ESC. The ESC recommended that we moderate the growth and manage the dependence of foreign workforce through a phased increase in foreign workers' levies and, in tandem, funding support for productivity investments. The rationale for this approach was that foreign labour should not be too accessible to companies, as the companies will have little incentive to invest in productivity improvements. The outbreak in the dormitories highlighted further unanticipated costs in our reliance on foreign labour. So the overall real cost of foreign workers may not be as low as we have earlier envisaged, both financial and social. In addition, the outbreaks also reminded us that we need to quickly improve the living conditions of the dormitories, and of course this enhancement will also add further cost to businesses. So How can we reduce our dependence on foreign labor? What is an acceptable number, both physically and socially? Does the cost-benefit analysis still make sense to have such a large numbers? Don't get me wrong, I'm not about to say let's just cut migrant workers' numbers to a certain lower level. It would have far-reaching implications and impact to our businesses, to our industries, and also to our efforts to build capabilities and capacity in both economic and social infrastructures. When I spoke to a number of my people in the construction industry to seek their views how we can reduce our reliance, almost everyone was concerned about what I'm about to say or ask the government to do. For example, will I be asking for the government will I be asking for a steep cut in the numbers of migrant workers? Well, I'm fully cognizant of the realities and that there are no quick fixes. I get it that there are really not much we can do and nothing much can change in the short term. Our industry, especially the construction sectors, will not be able to fulfill their contracts if they are unable to get the sufficient workers they need. We continue to need high numbers of migrant labour workers for our current and upcoming projects such as the MRT, the recently announced RTS, the HDB housings, even our climate change mitigation projects. We also need foreign workers there to help us build those. So if we cannot do much in the short term, what can we do in the medium to long term? Let me start with productivity improvements, specifically the construction sectors again. There were a number of attempts in the past to improve productivity. I read the report on the construction productivity by the Singapore Contractors Association done in December 2016, which detailed measures to improve productivity performance. In the report, it also highlighted the difficulties for firms to invest long-term to enhance productivity, given the nature of the businesses where construction companies will tender competitively for contracts, not knowing whether they will win it. Faced with this unknown of whether they will have work to do ahead of them, contractors will be reluctant to invest in productivity measures in a significant way, as they are unsure whether the investment costs can be fully recovered. Large companies can afford to take a longer-term view, but not for smaller companies who are just struggling to make ends meet given the competitive natures of the business. So the market will not be able to sort out itself to work towards productivity. So again, the government has to come in. Tender system for public contracts, public construction projects has to change with greater scores weightage to tenderers who use more productive construction methods and lesser dependence on migrant workers. These are not new ideas. We have talked about it before. But it has to be well perpetuated and to be carried out with greater insistence to change the contractors' modus operandi. The other possible radical moves are to identify firms that have invested significantly in productivity, to invite them early into projects to work with planners, architects, and engineers on more efficient construction processes that can be less labor-intensive. It will require a mindset shift in the way we look at contract tenders and how we overcome the value for money governance. We can always start something as a pilot, perhaps via a sandbox approach, and thereafter fine-tune the process for greater implementations. The tender price may well be higher, but we can take this as a price discovery exercise to know how contractor will actually cost a project that involves less migrant labor. On the demand side, we can also do more to reduce the overall demand for migrant labor. We should be more discerning in evaluating if some of our major construction projects should go ahead. Can we do without it? Is it wasteful on resources and materials? And what comes to mind is the collective sales or the en bloc developments that we always hear about. It's actually wasteful to demolish a building that is still in good working condition, only to build a replacement one that is quite similar. Besides consuming a significant number of migrant workers, is also not environmentally friendly from a resource and sustainability standpoint. We should further tighten the criteria for en bloc developments and only allow projects to go ahead for buildings that are much older or there are major changes to the land use. For example, we are intensifying the land use through the GFA adjustment. We should also scrutinize carefully our public projects and plan more judiciously. For example, in our neighborhood, we have a secondary school that went through a major upgrade, only to announce a few years later that the school will be merged with another one and to be relocated. So COVID-19 has substantially changed the world, our way of life, the way we conduct businesses in the future, and rebalancing the risk-reward trade-off and many others. And one sector that has been most impacted is aviation. We expect air travel to be much reduced post-COVID and may never recover to its previous level. Airlines may consolidate and hub at cheaper locations, and we may never be able to bring them back again, the major airlines to bring them back again, those that have relocated out of Changi hub during this period. So under this new operating landscape, should we still go ahead with the massive T5 projects? Are our assumptions and our parameters still valid in the new permanently changed setting? Are the risks now too high to go ahead with these massive investments? Can we work within our existing 4 terminals, regenerate new value propositions, and optimize what we already have with the terminals and the setup? We can perhaps still go ahead with the runway, the new runway, but do we need another terminal building? So I hope the government will review the decision, because such mega projects also do consume high numbers of migrant workers and crowd out more urgent demand by the other construction projects. Mr. Speaker, sir, I'll now move on to jobs that Singaporeans want. One of the key hallmarks of Singapore's economic success is our human resource and the availability of skilled manpower and talents to businesses. Our approach has always been to maximize the potential and opportunities for our local workforce and complemented it by allowing some external manpower, strengthen our competitiveness to the extent that it helps create growth and jobs for Singaporeans. Indeed, Singapore is able to seize additional growth opportunities beyond its size potential of our domestic workforce because we are able to leverage on external manpower resource. This makes good sense, especially when we are in the positive growth cycle, where demand for manpower is high and the domestic labour market remains tight. However, in a recessionary economic environment like what we are in today, where we are increasingly seeing slack in the labour market, this lever of external foreign manpower can now be used to manage our domestic unemployment and to nudge employers to hire more locally available workers. So we should never feel apologetic about that. We have done that in the past economic downturns, such as during the global financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, where we also reduced the EP and S passes. Hence, I welcome the MOM announcement last week to tighten up our EPs and S passes, in particular, to step up scrutiny on our EPs, on those employers that have not been responsive to government's effort to recruit more Singaporeans PMATs. This can be a more effective measure than raising the qualifying salaries. And these measures are necessary steps in response to a very weak labour market that we are in today, and the likelihood of rising local retrenchment in the months ahead as the JSS taper off. But make no mistake about it, notwithstanding these adjustments, we are still one of the most open economies in the world where cross-border manpower flows is concerned. About 1/3 of our labour force are foreigners. We have about 194,000 EPs and about 200,000 S passes working in Singapore. Not a small number at all. So I disagree with the Business Times headline last Friday that says that the latest MOM's latest announcement may put our financial hub aspiration at risk. Firstly, Singapore will still be among the most open financial centres in the world, including in terms of top talent flows and foreign manpower accessibilities. 2 weeks ago, MAS revealed that non-citizens account for about 30% of our workforce in the financial sector. And for senior management role, more than half are non-Singaporeans. So there are not many financial centres, major financial centres, that allow this level of openness. Global institutions choose to set up presence in Singapore not just because of our foreign manpower policy, but also of our many other compelling attributes. Among others, Singapore is the few remaining AAA rated jurisdiction in the world. We are reputed for excellent global connectivity, the depth and liquidity of our capital markets, sound regulation, integrity and enforceability of our judicial systems, and also importantly, political and social stability. We must therefore be self-assured that from time to time we will necessarily need to do some calibration to our manpower flows in response to cycle in the labour markets. More importantly, we need to focus back on the outcomes, and that is, have we been able to develop our local workforce to take on those jobs that are available in these sectors? These are the jobs that Singaporeans want to do. How can we effectively minimize the inherent frictions or the biasness working against achieving these outcomes? We have the data points from our S-passes and EPs. What are the areas of jobs that the companies are asking for EPs and S-passes? This can serve as our skills demand leading indicator, where we can plan and curate training programs, traineeships to target helping Singaporeans compete and take on those jobs. Of course, just tightening EP and S-pass alone would not be enough. We need other measures, such as the hiring incentive, the training allowance, subsidised traineeships, to urge companies to hire more locals. Narrowing the gaps of mismatches and reducing the frictions in job transitions are highly difficult undertakings. We know that. Left to the market, it may not resolve into the outcomes that we want. We therefore need concerted efforts involving a combination of measures and workarounds to achieve this, and importantly, with proactive intervention by the government. And this is now the task of the National Jobs Council led by SM Tharman. So let's not waste this crisis. Let's use the slack in the labour markets as an impetus to help Singaporeans adapt and take on these jobs. Singaporeans, whether they are young graduates or mid-career PMEs, can be up to the task. We just need to equip them, give them the opportunities, and importantly, have faith in them. So let's move the needle this time, sir. I support the motion.